In this video, I'll show you how to create a new data entity in the developer environment for Dynamics 365 apps. So I'm in the developer environment. I already have a project created. I'm working in the CUS layer in my model 1. So to create a new data entity, I'll right click on my project. I'll go to add new item. From here, I'll want to select the type of item, or I can select from the list here, but I'm going to select data model. Then I'll select data entity. I'll go ahead and give this data entity a name. So I'll call this my first entity, and I'll click add. That will add my new data entity to the project after I go through the data entity wizard. So let's say that I'm making this data entity so I can connect to my Dynamics 365 data outside of Dynamics 365 with a third-party app. Maybe I want to use the Excel Data Connector app. Maybe I also need to create recurring integrations in the data management workspace. I need to have a data entity for this. So you'll need to select the primary data source. All data entities have to have a primary data source. So I'll go ahead and select that. It is important to note that your table that you select as your primary data source has to have a natural key on it, or you will not be able to create a data entity. Next, I'll go ahead and specify the category. There's 5 different categories for entities. Since we're working with customer data, I'll go ahead and select master. Next is important. How are we going to be using this data entity? So here we can enable public API. This is if we're going to have integrations that connect to Dynamics 365 data outside of the system, we would need to enable public API. This is the same for the Excel Data Connector app. If you're creating a Power App with data, same with Power Automate as well. I'll go ahead and enable that, and I'll go ahead and give this a public entity name, and we'll call it my first entity. And we'll do the same below. And we want to enable the data management capabilities as well. When you do this, you will have a staging table that gets created for staging your data before you copy to target. And then 2 security privileges get created with your data entity, a view and maintain privilege. So once I click next, I'll then go ahead and be able to model my data entity. So here you can see I have my primary data source, and I also have a secondary data source under this table, which is primary address. First, we'll work with FM customer, and I'll go ahead and expand this so we can see more of this. We can see all the fields in that table. Here we can specify which fields we want to include or not include in this data entity. So maybe I'll take out image. Maybe I don't want the license image as well. We can also set our mandatory fields here. We can also convert labels to field names if that makes sense. You'll see that when we go over to the primary address table, it makes a little bit more sense to use the field names instead of labels here. We can then specify what we want to include here. Maybe I'll take address line 2 out. Once we're done, I'll go ahead and click finish, and that data entity will be created. We'll see the entity, the privileges, as well as your staging table here. We can go ahead and open up our entity. It looks very similar to a table. Instead of tables having, just fields here, we actually have a data sources node where we can have nested data sources within our entities. So you can actually see if I open up data sources, FM customer, we can see our fields, we can see any additional data sources that we might have included or nested in this data entity. I'll go ahead and click save. I'm also going to go ahead and build this so that we can go and take a look at this in the data management workspace. So my build finished, and I went over to the user interface and went to the data management workspace. You can see here when I open the workspace, you'll get an info log window saying that the entity list is being refreshed. You can continue working, so I'll go ahead and close that. I'll go ahead and see if the list has been refreshed. You can view your entity from the data entities tile here in the data management workspace. So I'll go ahead and click data entities. You can actually see here, we only see one at this moment, but it is our entity. You can see here my first entity. As the entity list refreshes, we can click the refresh button up here at the top. More data entities will show that are enabled for the data management workspace capabilities. We can view the structure, view target fields. We can also view and modify target mapping if we need to from here.